Good evening, everyone. My name is John Stewart. I'm an Associate Dean for Cultural and Community Engagement at FIU's College of Communication Architecture and the Arts. I'm the Executive Director of the Miami Beach Urban Studios, and it's Monday night, so I am so excited to be here with my dear friend and good colleague, Deborah Briggs from the Betsy, which in the real world is just down the street from us, but now that we are doing this remotely, we've become even closer, it seems. I see you way more often now than we ever did in the past. And so tonight we're here we started these on March 30th, and we're here, this could be our 16th or 17th edition of Zen and the Art of. And tonight we're doing an edition with, another edition with Pablo Cartaya of Zen and the Art of Writing in America. So Deborah, and I just want to say that if you have questions, I'll be kind of monitoring the questions, and please send questions to me in the chat, and I will try to interject them in the conversation whenever there seems to be an opportunity. So thank you all for being here, and Deborah, it's great to see you tonight.
Thank you, John, and welcome everyone to our 17th, actually, virtual salon, Zen and the Art of. And this is our 7th, hosted by one of my favorite people, Pablo Cartaya. And before I turn it over to him, I just wanted to thank our community partners, because everyone who knows FIU MBUS and the Betsy knows that our partnership is in our DNA. I wanted to thank the Arts and Business Council for helping us build such an incredible audience for these virtual salons. We've had about 1,200 households join us in these 17 weeks. And the County of Miami-Dade as well, the Miami Foundation, and I wanted to mention the University of Rochester Plutzik Poetry Series, because the University of Rochester is where Hyam Plutzik, my father, taught for 17 years, and that series has been going uninterrupted for 60 years. It's the longest running collegiate series in the country. FIU, our many partners there. Tonight, our special partners are Hillel, the Jewish Museum of Florida, and of course, MBUS and Casa Cuba. Let's see, who else? Jalit, the Jewish American and Holocaust Literature Conference. We've been working with them for about 10 years, and it's a delight to be presenting tonight with them. And then finally, Suburbano Ediciones. We are partnering with them, and they will be releasing a new collection of Hyam Plutzik poetry that's bilingual that we'll talk about a little later tonight, but they have partnered with us on this event. So without further ado, I want to introduce the fabulous and generous Pablo Cartaya, who has shared his time with us over the past 7 weeks from Maine, or Vermont or Maine, I'm not sure.
Vermont now.
Vermont, sorry. So here he is, he's gonna take it away and take us on a journey tonight. Thank you so much, everyone.
Well, I'm so delighted to be here, Deborah. Thank you, John. Thank you, and Colette and FIU and the Betsy. This has been, it's been quite a journey, and you all have been through a lot with me personally too, as we come into our Zoom meetings, and you know a lot of the stuff that, and it just feels from the very beginning where I spoke about my own work, and now that we're closing with Hyam Plutzik's work, I just feel a full circle kind of happening. And it's something that I want to just share very quickly about the idea of community, of family, of culture, and how those things help us to find that Zen, right? Because the title of this series has been Zen and the Art of Writing in America, right? And we're going to be speaking, about Hyam Plutzik, American poet, the movie, about his work. But I also want to, think about how that also relates to what we've been talking about throughout the month, throughout these 7 salons, and this idea of future, present, and past. We've talked to writers who are young adult writers who are writing literally to an audience for the future, right? We're talking about the present. We've spoken with poets who are living right now and who are writing about things that are going on right now in this world for people in this world right now. And now we get to close up with the past and how that brings us all together, right? And I have a personal love of the poetry of Hyam Plutzik. Why? Because when I started working at the Betsy, before I became a full-time writer, this was a person who I didn't know before. And as I read, independent of my relationship with Deborah Briggs and with the Betsy, independent of that, I turned myself into a student of his words and his work, and kind of tried to find the parallels. And interestingly, the parallels, my father is a Cuban immigrant. You know, he came here from Cuba in the 60s. And, you know, tried to make the best life for him, you know, for him and for his children and for his family. And here I am, you know, now writing in the spaces that I'm writing. And I look at how Hyam Plutzik, it's not that I don't want to presume that it's so similar, but I want to say that he was also a child of immigrants, and came in here and made his place in America, and wrote and carved his space in the American conversation. And so I just find a particular affinity and love for the work, and a real honor that I get to talk about him tonight and to share with some of our really great, we have some, you know, wonderful folks that are going to talk about the film, are going to talk about his work, and then we'll end with a poem, with one of my favorite poems. So, you know, I want to speak really quickly about the subject of connection, and what does it mean in these times in particular. These salons, they feel so distant, right? They feel like we're in a virtual space and we're alone sometimes in our rooms. But I want to think, and I want everyone who's listening to think about what it means to be connected in this day and age, in this moment in time, right? So connection is going to look differently than it did maybe 6 months ago. But there's something to be said about the way that we're all convening in this space and talking about artists, and talking about artists who lived and made an influence on American culture and letters. So, you know, this is tonight it's a 2-part event. And many of you have already watched the movie Hyam Plutzik, American Poet, via the Miami Jewish Film Festival's virtual cinema portal. For those of you who haven't, the link is up, and please plan to make time for it. It's a great film, and it's a moving tribute and provides insight into the life of Hyam Plutzik and his work. Tonight's event will have reflections on the movie, and then together, I think, you know, I'd like for us all to take a quick dive into the essence and content of Plutzik's poetry. It's our hope, as it's been with all our guests in this series, that, you know, that you'll read more on your own, and, as we say at the Betsy, to continue the conversation as we always do. You know, I want to give, you know, just a sort of a breakdown as to who is here tonight. Igor Sterenberg, Executive Director of the award-winning Miami Jewish Film Festival. Edward Moran, a literary scholar who consulted on the film and who has been a Hyam Plutzik scholar for over 15 years. And we'll also be sharing some commentary from presidential inaugural poet Richard Blanco about Hyam Plutzik's work. And John, I feel like John is my partner in crime in all of this. He's going to be assisting and posing questions from your guests. So we'll kind of leave it open for questions to, you know, anybody who has. So think about some thoughts, and John will field them as we go. So I want to take a moment to just share with Igor. Is Igor here? Are you here, Igor?
Right here.
Igor, hey, how's it going? It's nice to see you.
Pleasure.
So Igor, let's talk about the film, because, you know, a lot of folks are here and they've seen the film, and you've really done an incredible job with the film festival and sharing the work. So why is sharing a film like this important in general? Why do you think Hyam Plutzik's journey as an American artist and Jewish American poet why does it have implications today?
Well, firstly, I think this is quite a momentous opportunity for all of us, and far and wide in Miami, across the United States, across the world, who are, through this virtual platform that we are hosting, have the opportunity, through this unique digital bridge, to all watch the film. This is not something that you need to find on a DVD or on a Blu-ray. The virtual channel allows you to immediately access this remarkable content. And I think that that's one thing that really needs to be appreciated, that while we are all distanced right now in these really challenging times, that we still have the opportunity to experience something this unique as a film. Film is a really powerful platform. It democratizes art, makes it accessible to everyone and anyone anywhere. You know, through our digital component, our virtual program, you can watch this film no matter who you are and where you are, and you could have this opportunity for discovery. Because truly, that's what great art is. That's what film, as the most populous medium right now, allows you to experience, is a sense of discovery. You had an entire life story of this amazing American Jewish poet encapsulated in 50 minutes, less than an hour. And mind you, it is a very, very tiny chapter, you know, of a long, rich, incredibly significant life. But everyone had the opportunity to digest it and discover it in less than an hour. And I think that's really, truly important for us to recognize as well. Not everyone is well versed in poetry, but in less than an hour, we had the sense of learning about it, getting different perspectives. We had Pulitzer Prize winning poets who were participants and giving their and sharing their points of view. It entirely binds these really significant, difficult, complex thoughts and makes it digestible, comprehensible in a very short period of time. I think that's what the power of film is, the way it can bring all these incredible, unique thoughts all together and make it digestible and as almost a vehicle, as a bridge to anyone, anywhere in the world. We were very glad and very fortunate to be able to be participating and hosting this film, because this is a poet that was, for me, quite new too. I did not grow up reading poetry. English was not my first language, kind of like Hyam, who I think up until early age, he was speaking Yiddish. The opportunity of watching the film, of having the privilege of discovering his life story, of learning more about him, appreciating the art form of poetry more and more, is something that I think that this particular movie achieved so well. And we were so proud to be able to host it and share it with the world. Pablo, you're muted.
It's interesting. Thank you. It's interesting how in this environment, how we can find, and again, I really wanted to think about this idea of connection, right? And when I came to the work through my work at the Betsy, it was like I didn't know who he was. So how important is it for us to, I don't want to say spread the word, but in a way, like how I know that when I go and I speak, when I speak about my own books, I talk about the influences in my own work, and then how those that came before me, sort of paved the way. Why does a poet like this, now get? Why are we spending the time learning now? Why haven't we before? Why didn't we study this in schools before? It's an important thing, because right now we're talking about a lot of different things in this country, right? And a lot of marginalizations and a lot of erasure in this country. So I want to know, why haven't we spoken more about this, and what can we do to be better about this knowledge? It's a great film.
I don't think I'm the right subject to provide an answer to the question. I'm not a scholar of poetry nor of Hyam Plutzik. What I will say is that the opportunity that we have in even broaching this question that you are raising is what this movie affords us. That we are all now, more than 50 people and even many more who are viewing this remotely as this is live streaming, are all now wrestling with these questions, I think is what film, and this particular film, is able to inspire, right? It's one thing to read a book or to read the poem, But to have so many multitude of perspectives, all sharing these different insights of their own life experiences as they're interpreting this man and his story and his work, is one of those things that this movie achieves once again so very well, so well crafted. But that's the medium of film. That's the art of film. Is when it's done well, it really plays on your heartstrings and on your mind and provokes these really important questions.
And it's a good space now, especially in the educational environment that we're in right now, which is, very much becoming virtual, is to have this accessibility might be a great opportunity. Is there some of you know, and some of you have seen it, but those who don't, where can we find this? And can you give us some links?
So the film is being hosted on our virtual program that is, in other words, it's not so many words, it's basically our YouTube channel. We also have parallel to that our virtual screening room in which we premiere as encore presentations online past festival favorites as well, and that's provided through a partnership with Vimeo. You basically get to have an exclusive festival experience right at the comfort of your home with your loved ones. If you go to our website at miamijewishfilmfestival.org, or if you follow us on social media, you'll be able to immediately access all these amazing resources. We right now are hosting about 12 films, and every week we will be hosting a new film. So it's kind of like your own personal Jewish Netflix in a way. And you get to see films you may have missed at our festival and many more that we may have not been able to include for various programming reasons. And you get to see them and you get to enjoy them. And then you get to speak with the filmmakers as well, because we bring them down to our own virtual conversation series. But circling back to why I feel this film is so important is it not only raises these questions, but right now we're living at a time when the internet, the web medium, gives you the opportunity to find those answers as well. So as I watched the film and I was so enamored with this particular poet, I can go online and discover his poetry. I have the resource, I have the opportunity to go and continue exploring and continue the discovery. And I think that's what film is not the be all and the end all. It is just one stop on a long journey that we all are hopefully inspired to make.
Excellent. And I want everybody to know this was Igor Sterenberg. He's the executive director of the award-winning Miami Jewish Film Festival. Igor, thank you so much. We're talking about, for those of you who are tuning in or who don't know, we're talking about Hyam Plutzik's American Poets. And you can visit the Miami Jewish Film Festival.org.
Yes.
Yes.
Festival.org. We've already had, for this film, so everyone knows, more than 500 people have already watched the documentary in just 4 days.
Yeah, and that's amazing.
Love the film, share it. Share the link. This is one of those rare moments where we actually encourage word of mouth. Share the link. Don't keep it to yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to turn now to Edward Moran, who has really spent a lot of time with the words of Hyam Plutzik. Edward, thank you so much for being here. You're a literary scholar. You consulted on the film as well, and you have been with you've been with Hyam Plutzik's words for over 15 years now. Ed, is that correct about that?
That's correct. That's about as long as he taught at the University of Rochester.
Well, wonderful. So I want to. So if we could first, what was your role in the making of the film?
Well, I'm listed as the literary advisor to the film, and how this all started about 15 years ago. The University of Rochester, where Plutzik's archives are located, put out a request for proposal to digitize and sort video footage.
Ed, if I can trouble you to just push back just a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. That's great.
The University of Rochester put out a request for proposal to digitize and archive his recordings, home movies, various things. And the RFP fell into the hands of Christine Choi, who's the Academy Award nominee documentary filmmaker at NYU. She was nominated for an Academy Award for her best documentary some years ago. And I got to know her over the years and worked with her on a number of projects. And she called me one day and said, "Ed, who's Hyam Plutzik?" At the time, I had just I was the editor, or the associate editor of the World Authors Reference Series that was originally edited by Stanley Kunitz back in the 1940s. And I said to Christine, well, he was a poet. And I don't know that much about him, but I could do some more research. And she said, well, do research because let's make a film about him. Let's propose that we do a film. So I did the research, and we went to the U of R and to the Plutzik family and said, we think this is an interesting film. Well, let's make one. And they graciously said, yes, go ahead and do it. And we interviewed all of Hyam Plutzik's contemporaries. Stanley Kunitz, who was 99 at the time of his interview. We did the last interview with him before he died at the age of 100. We interviewed Hayden Carruth, Galway Cannell, Donald Hall, who edited the prestigious Wesleyan Poetry Series. And we interviewed Grace Schulman, who was the director of the 92nd Street Y Poetry Project. So we had a whole raft of major figures who knew Hyam Plutzik, who worked with Hyam Plutzik, who admired his work. We spent a year interviewing them, and we interviewed Tanya Plutzik, who was Hyam's widow, who's now 101. We interviewed her when she was 86, and she was just amazing. She really, as you can see in the film, she really has a great admirer of Hyam's work, very devoted to his work. So that all of these elements came together, we made a film. And it was shown at the Jerusalem Jewish Film Festival. It was shown in Berlin at the Zebra Poetry Film Festival, and a number of film festivals in the US. So that's how it all started 15 years ago. We're still going strong.
So, I mean, it's an incredible story. I mean, you know, with these luminaries speaking about Hyam Plutzik and his work and his life, you know, why do you feel that interviews like this are important? And then just a follow-up question is, you know, is there archival footage is it stored, and are there any plans for it?
Yes, there is archival footage. We have hundreds of hours of interviews that are stored at the University of Rochester in the Hyam Plutzik archives. We thought it was really important to get first-person accounts of people who knew his work, who worked with Hyam, because these memories are vanishing. If they're not written down, if they're not recorded, we will lose them forever. So we really had as our goal not just to make this particular film, but to document a very important figure in American cultural life of the 20th century.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, just to bring a personal anecdote to this, my father is a veteran of the Bay of Pigs, and he was imprisoned for 2 years, and he returned. And he's 88 right now, and he speaks a lot about, like, there's not many of us left.
Right.
And I just, you know, it's very, I think it's very important to be able to keep the stories, keep telling the stories, and keep documenting the stories so that we can have an access point, right, to what it was, you know.
One of Hyam Plutzik's famous lines of poetry that I remember is, he said, "Nothing can be done, but something can be said, at least." Right. And that's right. In that spirit, we're saying something.
Yep. So, you know, we've been speaking about the film for a bit, and I want to thank you for sharing your insight on your experience with that. Let's take a moment to use this as a jumping board to talk about his poetry. Now, we had inaugural poet Richard Blanco say a few words about the work, and I'm wondering if you can share with us a little bit about that, about Richard Blanco's contribution, and then kind of lead us into the videos, because I know there's a special video that he recorded for this very talk.
Yeah, we were very happy to have Richard Blanco as part of this project. Now, how we got involved with him is we're translating Hyam Plutzik's poetry into Spanish. Now remember, Hyam Plutzik grew up speaking only Yiddish and Russian at home. He did not learn English until he was 8 years old. But he wrote his poems in English during the middle of the 20th century in America, which was a time when English only was the rule. And then when you talked about erasure earlier, I think the erasure happened in the mid-20th century when we didn't have the immigrant experience. We tried to put that past us. We tried to be only Americans, only speaking English. And for that reason, we lost contact with some of the other languages that are very important in our backgrounds. So now, since the film was produced, Hyam's work has now been translated into German, into Yiddish, into Hebrew, into Croatian, and now into Spanish. We're thanks to Suburbano Ediciones, we've translated 32 of his poems into Spanish, edited by George B. Henson, who's at Middlebury College. He's a very prestigious, well-regarded Spanish translator, and he supervised the translation process. And we have poems translated by 14 poets, both from Spain and from the Americas. So we're giving wings to Hyam Plutzik's work again in another language. The book is going to be published in just a few weeks from now. And Richard Blanco very graciously agreed to write a foreword to it. And we have a recording of him that we can show in a few minutes, where he's reading from that foreword. And he talks about Plutzik in the context of other important poets like Rilke. See, Hyam once said he used to think poetry was just beautiful language, but then he came to realize it was more than just beautiful language. It was also a way to express the nuances of the world. And then he said it's a way to express, it's the great synthesizer of human knowledge. So Plutzik was a very deep thinker. He just didn't write pretty poetry. He wrote poems that expressed declaration. In other words, a poet would write a few lines and then declare something about the universe, or declare something about reality. And that's what Richard Blanco focuses on in his essay.
So let's take a minute, John. If you
Sure.
can cue up that video, for us all.
I will. Thank you. And everybody, just beware. I'm going to share a screen, which means there's a great disruption that you'll all encounter, but it will unshare as soon as this is over. But I'm going to try to do this as smoothly as possible. Oh. Yeah. Okay, hope you can see that, and I'm going to turn it on.
Hyam Plutzik's poetry strikes me as charged with the same kind of declarative power. I'm awed by his daring to tell us something through his poems. As he writes in The Geese that there is no force stronger than the will toward destiny, which is death. And also in To My Daughter, when he advises, you must learn soon, that even love can be no shield. At moments like this, Plutzik's voice becomes proverbial and oracular, yet maintains an intimate and vulnerable tone, like that of a close friend who shares with me some hard-won wisdom. As such, I feel wiser, too, more aware of my own being, ultimately grateful for what Plutzik so lucidly bears about the human condition in poems like Of Eternity Considered at a Closed System. When he tells me, whatever is won forever, whatever is lost is gained forever. Whether commenting on my students' poems or reviewing poems by my contemporaries, or even when I work on drafts of my own poems, I ask myself, why does this poem exist? It's a kind of poetic litmus test to evaluate whether or not the poem has a relatively strong or weak emotional center, or none at all. Hyam Plutzik's poems certainly pass the test. They're infused with a certain relentless urgency to feel and grasp whatever is emotionally at hand. It's not simply the importance of what Plutzik's poems tell me, but that it's told through the voice of an honest and sentient being who is charged with emotional agency, who has something at stake in his poems. This claim holds true whether Plutzik contemplates nature in Connecticut autumn. I have seen the pageantry of the leaves falling, their sear brown frames descending brokenly, like old men lying down to rest. Or ponders the philosophical in divisibility. Memory knows no walls. They are elementary limits. Only a fool would cut the sea with a knife, or say to a wind, exceed this line at your peril. Or meditates on the nature of poetry itself in the poetic process. To be then, passionately impersonal, yet nourish the self, is the poetic dilemma. Hyam Plutzik understands that poetry, which relies only by thoughts on subject matter, what he tells, is not enough. A poem without an emotional raison d'etre is a mute songbird.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.
All right, and that was, and then John, those were the two videos, correct?
That was yes, they were combined into one, and I will put in the chat the poems that he mentioned in those.
Okay, great. Thank you you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to just kind of reflect on that just a little bit, you know, and Ed, if you could tell us just a little bit, because John will post the poems. Can you tell us a little bit about the new collection of Plutzik's work that was mentioned, and you know, which the Spanish translation? So what is the goal of the book? Who is involved? And again, if you could just repeat for us who's going to publish it, because I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, it's going to be published by Suburbano Ediciones in Miami. And it's a group of 32 poems from Hyam Plutzik's entire poetic corpus, from his original collection in 1949 up through Erasure in 1961. And we've asked 14 translators from Spain and from the Americas to translate the work, and it was supervised by George B. Henson, who's at Monterey, in California, Monterey University, who's a distinguished Spanish scholar and also a editor of World Literature Today and some of the major translation organs when he was out at the University of Oklahoma. So it's a book that has very serious work in it by some of the leading Spanish translators today.
Right. Thank
It's
you.
going to be a bilingual edition.
And then if we want to find out more information about Hyam Plutzik's work and his life, we can go to the website.
You can go to the website, HyamPlutzikPoetry.com.
HyamPlutzikPoetry.com. Thank you so much, Ed. That was insightful, and I really appreciate it. John, I think we're right around the time where we take a few questions from the audience. I want to give a few questions, and then we'll kind of, you know, sort of wrap up this evening. So if I'm sure that you've been getting you've been getting a whole bunch.
So one of them was asking about Hyam Plutzik's education and wondering maybe if Ed could talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, well, Hyam was born in 1911 in Brooklyn, and when his family,
and today's his birthday.
Today's his 109th birthday.
Yes. Today he's 109.
109. He would have been. He was born in Brooklyn, but he moved with his family to a farm in Connecticut. And he went to a one-room schoolhouse in Connecticut, and then graduated from high school in Waterbury area, and went on to Trinity College in Hartford, where his mentor was Odell Shepard, who was a major American writer of the Transcendentalist era, won a Pulitzer himself in the 1920s. And Hyam Plutzik, he considered him as his mentor. so that he actually dedicated a book to him that was published, that we published a few years ago. But after Hyam graduated from Trinity, he went on to Yale. He became the first Jewish student in the English department at Yale in the 1930s, and did his master's work at Yale, but he never went on to get a PhD, although he did a lot of work for it, but he never officially got a PhD. But after being at Yale, then he went in the U.S. Army during the war, and afterwards began teaching at the University of Rochester, where he remained for 17 years until his death in 1962 at the age of 50.
And that leads me to another question. Do I have time to ask?
Yeah, I think we have time for one more. Sure.
One question was, how did the idea of the film come about initially?
Well, I explained that earlier, but I will say that Christine Choi, the filmmaker, came to me and said, let's investigate this. We might want to do a film about him. He sounds like an interesting person. So Christine and I did some research. She was the film person, I was the literary person, and we presented our findings to the University of Rochester and to the Plutzik estate. And they said, go ahead, do a film if you think it would be interesting. And we ended up interviewing leading poets of the time, contemporaries of Hyam Plutzik, Donald Hall, Gail Cannell, Stanley Kunitz, Hayden Carruth, Grace Schulman, a whole list of major poets of the mid-20th century that appear in the film.
Another question came up. This might be for Deborah or Jonathan or somebody else on the line, but what's it like for children of Hyam Plutzik to grow up with this body of work, and how did their reaction to his work change over the years?
So I'm here. I know Jonathan's on, but I can answer from my perspective. You know, I always tell people, I'll just answer it from the personal standpoint. You know, I lost my father young. I was just almost 4 years old. There were 3 other siblings, Jonathan, who's a little older than I am. I won't tell his age on here. And my brother Alan, a little older, and my sister Roberta, a little older than that. Had my father not been a poet, I would not have had the chance to know him as well as I do. Having a parent who's a writer, who leaves that work behind, I do feel like I know him. And another story I'll share is that about 10 years ago, I went to the Plutzik archive. I know Tom Cassett is on tonight. I saw his name, and Tom's been a colleague of ours at the OVAR for many years. And I contacted him and I said, you know, I'd like to spend the afternoon with my dad's papers just to get a sense as an adult, you know, for the content. And I came across some of his writing proposals he had done to the University of Rochester to do just the kind of work that Jonathan and I have been doing at the Betsy, to build community around the arts. And I thought, wow, you know, there is something about this. I don't know, it's in the ether. So I guess, you know, the answer to my question is, you know, I feel privileged to have had a parent who was a writer. And my guess is that most children who have parents who work in the arts feel that way, because you have a way of knowing your parents that you wouldn't have had.
There was the other part of the question about how you and your siblings' reactions changed over the years. I mean, did you recognize this as a child and the specialness of poetry?
Yeah, I would say no to that. I mean, I was very young, and Roberta, my sister, was 13. I would say she understood it more deeply, I'm sure. I know she has a lot of memories of my dad. My dad was a fisherman, and there are a lot of poems about fishing, and Roberta in the movie talks about those memories of going fishing with him. But you know, something I've heard from my mom is that my dad was a pretty humble guy, and he didn't talk about his work that much with his kids, because that wasn't, you know, that wasn't important to a child. He did write children's stories for us, and those have not ever been published, but we do still read them and share them. So they are really funny and entertaining. So, and I will just close with this. In working with Pablo, since he writes for young people, the first poem I ever shared with him was one of my dad's children's poems, because I thought he would share with me, you know, sort of the humor and the joy in reading it. And so, yeah. So I think probably my father talked to us in a way we would understand his talent, by writing for us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm, you know, before we close up, you know, I am the father of 3 children, and one of which is 13. I'm a writer, these are kids right now, and I think that it's like what you said, Deb. I think that there's the memory of the fishing rather than the actual word, the poetry. I mean, I know that my kids bring up a lot of physical memories that we have. They don't tell me necessarily about my books, but I do hear them sometimes quoting my books. And so I think that there's a special link there with the kids, and I think it's really neat.
Can I ask, is there time for one more question?
Yeah, I think Jonathan yeah, I think yes.
Maybe Ed could answer this. It's
I think Jonathan is wanting to share. And
Jonathan, please. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Wait, we've got to unmute him. Did he come in as himself? Let's see. Jonathan. I don't see him. What?
It said he raised his hand.
Oh, raised his hand. Let me see if there's a hand raised.
I think I'm good.
You're good. There you go.
So I'm just going to be quick. I'm going to tell you a little story. I mean, actually, I was moved by Pablo's description of his children knowing his work, and there is something about sort of the immortality of words and the power of that. We obviously grew up in a household that celebrated, our mother celebrated creativity as being sort of the most important thing, whatever the hierarchy is. But I'm going to tell you a quick story of a lobby one day in the Betsy. One of our good friends, now elderly, Jerry Stern, the great American poet who spent time in Miami a lot with his wife and used to hang at the Betsy sometime. Wrote a beautiful poem, by the way, about our late dog, Katie, which I'll recommend to you. But Jerry came in for a poetry reading actually one day, and my son Zachary saw him walking around the lobby. This elderly gentleman and walked over, didn't know who he was, offered to show him wherever it was he was trying to get. And Jerry said to him, I know the people who own this hotel. And my son said, well, actually, those are my parents, which led to a conversation where Zach admitted that his name is Zachary Hyam Plutzik, actually named for Deborah's and my father. Whereupon Jerry Stern began to recite my father's poetry from memory. And I tell you that story because, again, it's one of my favorite stories because of this this power, this immortality of language, and this moment where this, distinguished, important poet stumbled into my son, was able to spout a few lines of Hyam Plutzik poetry. For me, kind of says it all. It lives forever, as does Pablo's work now, and great Pablo work yet to come. And there's something very special about whether it's on film or it's about language that is true. And with that, I'll stop.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you, Jonathan. It's I think that I just want to, just close here, thanking everyone for spending the last 7 Mondays with us, on the search of Zen and the art of writing in America. And it's really a great joy of mine to be able to close with Hyam Plutzik again. I mean, there are so many connections that I don't want to spend too much time getting into, but I will say that Ed, when you were speaking about language and that Yiddish was the first words and Russian was the first language. I mean, my first language was Spanish. I didn't speak English until I got into school in this country, and my Spanish was kind of pushed down to the point that I forgot it. And I've spent most of my adult life trying to relearn it. So the idea that a poet like this a man like this was doing this so many years ago and speaking to it really resonates with me even now. And this is the importance, I think, of learning from the past, learning from poets like Hyam Plutzik, like really embracing it, because there are connections that we may not even know. I'm Cuban American, and living in a different century, right? And there's still this connectedness, and I want to just acknowledge that, and also I would like to give a shout out to Mrs. Tanya Plutzik, who's with us this evening. If you want to talk about like being there for your guy and supporting him. There's nobody better than Mrs. Plutzik. She has spent, over 60 years, promoting and supporting and really being a champion of her late husband's work. And it's an incredible thing, that keeping poetry, keeping art. It's like what Jonathan said, is like that art is the important thing in the room, regardless of hierarchy. And I think it's a real testament to who she is and what she believes in and the work of her late husband. There's a broadside of one of Hyam Plutzik's poems that I have actually in my writing office. And I don't even know if Jonathan knows this or not, but I have it framed. And I look at it from time to time, and it was a poem that one of the poems that I actually translated for the collection. I will preface it by saying it's one of the weaker translations. I'm not a translator, but I was very honored to do it, and very proud. But I hope that we can close with just a quick reading of that poem. When we were live at the Betsy, I would often close with one of Hyam Plutzik's poems, but we're virtual now. And again, connectedness is the language that I wanted to keep bringing up, and connection. And so I just hope that in lieu of being present with the 50 plus participants and however many people are listening outside virtually, I hope that we can be connected together in a way through the words that this great poet gave us. So, on hearing that my poems were being studied in a distant place, what are they mumbling about me there? Here, they say, he suffered. Here was glad. Are words clothes or the putting off of clothes? The scene is as follows. My book is open on 30 desks. The teacher expounds my life. Outside the window, the Pacific roars like a lion, beside which my small words rise and fall. In this alliteration, a tower crashed. Are words clothes or the putting off of clothes? Here, in the fisherman casting on the water, he saw the end of the dreamer, and in that image, death, naked. Out of my life, I fashioned a fistful of words. When I opened my hands, they flew away. Thank you all so very much. I hope that your time here with us was fruitful as it was for me. I want to thank again the Betsy, which is my family. I love everyone there, and I want to thank FIU, John, and Colette, Ed. I said Edward. Ed. I know you only as Ed. Ed, thank you so much. Igor, thank you for sharing, and everyone who was there. As has been said, please continue the conversation, and I hope to see you all soon.
Thank you, Pablo. You've done a great job, Pablo. Thank you very much. Deborah, did you want to make some final comments about tonight and what's...
Yes, I just wanted to thank everyone again, of course. Thank you, a personal thank you to you, Pablo, from me, and everyone else here. And also just to encourage everyone to meet us here again next Monday night, where we start a new series. And John has a very special guest next Monday night. John, would you like to share real quickly?
Yes, it's going to be Giddy Grinstein, the founder of the Tikkun Olam Makers Global. He's an inspirational person, an amazing guy who is envisioning a brand new world, and I think it's all part of what we were talking about when we were thinking about our Zen. Right, and then the week after that, we are featuring two poets in the LGBT space: Julie Marie Wade, who teaches at FIU, and Joy Layden, who's a really interesting poet and person. And then finally in that series, Carol Ann Taylor, who is an entrepreneur and jazz singer. And so we hope to see you for our next little series. And thanks again for joining us tonight for all the reasons that have been mentioned.
Everyone take care. And as I always say at the end of our sessions, wear a mask. Good night.